The day I saw her for the last time, the sky turned the same color as the flowers she used to carry, pale yellow like old memory. I remember standing outside my mother's shop that evening when the woman from Enugu Road smiled at me and stretched out her flower. I smiled back, just once, and she looked at me like someone who had waited for that moment all her life. The next day, she vanished. Nobody saw her again. That was how everything started. Before that day, she always walked past our shop every evening. Around the same time the sun began to hide. She carried her small bucket filled with bright flowers and walked slowly, like someone counting her steps. The whole street knew her, but nobody really knew who she was. We all just called her the Woman from Enugu Road. People said she sold flowers near the hospital. Some said she was only walking around to clear her head. For me, she was just that quiet woman that always tried to talk to me, even when I didn't care. She would wave and smile, sometimes even bend down to pick one flower from her bucket and stretch it toward me. I never collected it. I would just nod or pretend to be busy pressing my phone. My mother used to say I was rude, that I should at least wave back, but I didn't see the point. What would I do with a flower? Still, she never stopped waving. Even when I ignored her for many days, she kept smiling like she didn't notice. Some children on the street used to run to her and collect flowers, shouting and laughing, but I didn't join them. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I was too grown for that. Then came that strange evening. It had rained in the afternoon and everywhere smelled of wet sand. I was helping my mother count the money she made from selling soft drinks when I saw her coming again. Same bucket, same calm walk. Something in me just changed. Maybe it was how peaceful she looked or how tired her eyes seemed that day. She waved again, and for the first time I smiled back. She stopped like she couldn't believe it, smiled deeply, and handed me a yellow flower. I collected it, and she said thank you very softly before walking away. That was the last time anyone on Enugu Road saw her. The next evening came. No woman, no flowers. Then another day, and another. At first I didn't care much, but after a week, I started to feel something strange inside me, like guilt mixed with worry. It was almost as if that smile I gave her opened a door that should have stayed closed. Days passed and the woman from Enugu Road never came again. At first I told myself she would appear soon. Maybe she traveled or fell sick. But 2 weeks went by and her spot on the street remained empty. I didn't even know when she started meaning something to me, but I found myself watching the road every evening, expecting that slow walk, that soft smile, that bucket of flowers. I started asking people if they had seen her. The Akara woman by the corner said she thought the woman moved away. The gateman of the big house said he never really noticed her at all. Everyone just shrugged like she was nobody. One evening, I couldn't hold it anymore. I told my mother I was going for a walk and followed the same direction the woman always went. I walked for a long time until I reached the small roundabout near the hospital. I asked the corn seller there if he knew any woman who sold flowers. He scratched his head and said he remembered one woman like that, but she used to sell near the old cemetery road before the place became quiet. Something about the way he said it made my heart beat fast. I followed the road he showed me. It was a lonely street with tall grasses and broken fences. At the end of the road, I saw a small gate made of rusted iron. A sign above it said, Holy Cross Cemetery. I stood there for a while before walking in. The air inside was cold and silent. There were graves everywhere, some new, some covered with weeds. I saw an old man bending over a grave, trimming the grass around it. I greeted him and told him I was looking for a woman who used to sell flowers. He stopped working and stared at me. When I described her, he sighed deeply and leaned on his hoe. He said it sounded like I was talking about Madame Ngozi, a woman who died long ago. My mouth opened, but no word came out. He said she died about 10 years ago and that she used to live not far from the hospital. I told him that couldn't be true, that I saw her every day walking with her flowers. The man shook his head slowly and said I wasn't the first person to say that. People had claimed they saw her walking in the evenings, smiling, greeting, carrying flowers, but no one ever followed her far enough to know where she went. He pointed to a grave under a big frangipani tree. That's where she was buried, he said quietly. My whole body felt cold. I walked to the grave and looked down. The name on the small cement plate was faded, but I could still read it. The woman from Enugu Road had been dead for 10 years, yet I had smiled at her only 2 weeks ago. I stood there staring at the grave until the old man called me back to myself. The air around that place felt heavy, like the ground was breathing slowly. I asked the man what kind of person Madame Ngozi was when she was alive. His eyes softened as he dropped the hoe and wiped his hands on his shirt. He said she was not always kind. She worked in the hospital near here, in the laboratory. She hardly spoke to anyone and never smiled. Some said she had suffered too much in life, that her husband ran away and her only child died early, and it turned her heart cold. He paused and looked around as if checking that no one was listening, then told me a story that made my skin crawl. He said there was once a boy, about my age, who was admitted to the hospital many years ago. The boy needed blood quickly, and the doctors were searching for someone who matched his blood group. It turned out that Madame Ngozi was the only one available that day whose blood could save him. The boy's parents went to her in tears and begged her to donate, but she refused. She said she had her own problems and couldn't waste her strength on someone she didn't know. The boy died that same night. When the boy's parents came to take the body, they were broken with anger and sorrow. Right there in the hospital corridor, they cursed her. They said she would never find peace in this life or the next until she learned how to smile, how to show love, and how to receive love from a boy the age of their son. After that day, people said Madame Ngozi became even quieter. She stopped coming to work. She would sit by her window for hours staring at the street, not talking to anyone. Then one morning, her neighbors found her dead in her room. The old man said when they buried her, strange things began to happen. Sometimes in the evenings, flowers would appear on random graves and nobody knew who put them there. Some people said they saw a woman walking with a bucket of flowers near the road, smiling and greeting everyone she saw. Some believed it was her spirit trying to find peace, doing the good she refused to do when she was alive. I couldn't move. Everything started making sense, the way she always smiled at me, the flowers, the evening walks, her peace-filled face. I realized maybe I had been part of something far bigger than I understood. Maybe the reason she always waved at me wasn't just kindness. Maybe she was looking for something. Maybe I was the boy her soul had been waiting for. That night I could not sleep. The story the old man told kept playing in my head like a film. I kept seeing her face in my mind, the soft smile she gave me that last evening, and the way her eyes had looked brighter than usual, almost like tears hiding behind peace. I began to understand that my small smile that day had meant something big. Maybe too big. I kept asking myself, why me? Why now? Why after 10 years? The next morning I went back to the cemetery. The old man was sweeping dry leaves near the gate. I asked him if he knew where the boy's parents lived, the ones who had cursed her. He said he heard they moved to another side of town, around coal camp. I thanked him and left. Something in my chest told me I had to find them. It felt like if I didn't, that woman's story would never truly end. It took me 3 days of asking questions, going from house to house, before I found a small compound where people said an old couple lived quietly, never going out much. I walked into the compound and met an old woman sitting on a stool peeling oranges. Her hands shook slightly, and her face carried the kind of sadness that time never washes away. When I greeted her and mentioned the hospital and the story of their son, her knife fell from her hand. She stared at me as if she had seen a ghost. I told her everything. How the woman from Enugu Road used to pass my mother's shop, how she always smiled and gave out flowers, how she disappeared after I smiled back at her, and how I later found her grave. The old woman began to cry softly. Her husband came out from inside, walking slowly with a stick, and when he heard my story, he sat down without saying a word for a long time. Then he sighed and said, "Maybe it was time." They told me their son's name was Namdi. He was kind, always helping people. When he was dying in that hospital bed, his mother knelt before Madame Ngozi, begging for help, but the woman refused to even look at her. After his death, she had cursed the woman out of pain. But hearing my story now, she said maybe God had given that woman a second chance to find peace through me. The man held his wife's hand, and both of them looked at me with tired eyes. They asked me to take them to her grave, that maybe it was time to forgive and let everything rest. I felt my heart beating fast, but I knew this was the right thing to do. It was as if all of us, me, them, and even the woman from Enugu Road, were being pulled together for one last thing that would set us free. The day we went to the cemetery, the sky was quiet, and the wind was soft. It was early evening, the same time the woman from Enugu Road used to walk past my mother's shop with her bucket of flowers. I led the old couple through the small gate, past the graves and the tall frangipani tree where I had first seen her name. The ground was dry, covered with brown petals. The old man held his wife's hand as they walked slowly behind me. None of us spoke. It felt like even the air was waiting for something to happen. When we reached her grave, the old woman bent down and touched the cement plate gently. The name on it was almost gone, but she still whispered it like a prayer. Her shoulders shook as she cried, and her husband placed his hand on her back. I stood there watching, feeling a strange warmth in my chest, the kind that comes when something long and painful is finally ending. The old woman began to speak softly to the grave. She said she had carried anger in her heart for too many years, that she had hated the woman deeply because she took her son's life through her coldness. But now, after hearing everything, she believed the woman had suffered enough. She said maybe God had given her another chance to walk this same road again and learn kindness the hard way. She said she forgave her. The old man closed his eyes and nodded. He said he too forgave her, that no one really knows what pain does to a person's heart until it breaks them. Then he turned to me and told me that maybe my smile was the key to the woman's peace. He said sometimes God uses one person's small kindness to heal what bitterness destroyed years ago. I took out the yellow flower I brought and placed it gently on her grave. The wind blew stronger just then, carrying the smell of fresh hibiscus through the air. It felt like the world took a deep breath. For a moment, we all stood there silently as the leaves around the grave began to sway. It was as if she was saying thank you. As we left the cemetery, I looked back one last time. The grave seemed calmer, brighter, like the setting sun was resting directly on it. The old couple walked hand in hand ahead of me, and I followed slowly, feeling light for the first time in days. That night, I sat outside my mother's shop again, the same spot where I used to see her pass. I didn't see her, but I could almost smell her flowers in the breeze. And even though she was gone, I smiled again, not because I was happy, but because I finally understood. Love, no matter how late it comes, can still bring peace to the living and the dead.